Welcome to the channel. I know many of you listen to these videos to relax or fall asleep, and I'm really glad you're here. Before we start today's crime stories, please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. And if there's any crime story you'd like me to narrate for you, feel free to request it in the comment section. Now let's begin. Story 1. Zdzislaw Marchwicki was born on October 18, 1927, in the Polish industrial city of Dąbrowa Górnicza. His family life was unstable and difficult. His father married 5 different women over the course of his life. From these marriages, Zdzislaw had several half-siblings. The family was not wealthy, and the children grew up in a tough environment. As a boy, Zdzislaw did not enjoy school and was not a dedicated student. Teachers noted he was of average intelligence but showed little interest in his studies. He did not complete his formal education and failed to graduate from school. This lack of qualifications limited his options for the future. When World War II began, Zdzislaw was still a teenager. During the German occupation of Poland, he was sent away from his family to perform forced labor. He was sent to a town called Prudnik in the region of Upper Silesia. Here, he worked for the German war effort against his will. It was a hard period of his life with little freedom. During his time in Prudnik, an incident occurred that would later be noted in official records. He was caught performing a sexual act with an animal. This was considered a serious crime. Because of this, the German secret police, known as the Gestapo, arrested him. The Gestapo officers beat him and then sent him to a Nazi concentration camp called Blechhammer. He was imprisoned there under harsh conditions. After some time, he was released from the concentration camp. He returned to the town of Prudnik to continue his forced labor. He stayed there until the end of the war. When the war finally ended, he was able to return home to Dąbrowa Górnicza. He was now a young man shaped by experiences of war, forced labor, and imprisonment. Back in his hometown, he needed to find work. With no education, he took on manual jobs. He eventually found employment as a bus driver for a transportation company. He drove buses on local routes. He also married a woman named Maria, and they began to have children together. To people outside his home, he seemed to be living an ordinary working-class life. Life in Dąbrowa Górnicza continued normally for Zdzislaw Marchwicki and his family. He worked his shifts driving a bus. To his neighbors, he was an unremarkable man. However, in the wider region of Zagłębie and Upper Silesia, a terrifying series of events began. On November 7, 1964, in the city of Katowice, a 15-year-old girl named Anna Misek was killed. Her body was found in the Dąbrówka Mała district. She had been hit very hard in the back of the head with a heavy, blunt object. After she was dead, the attacker hit her several more times. Then, the person moved her body about 10 meters. The attacker opened her coat, lifted her skirt, and exposed her private parts. The police investigated, but they did not find the person who did it. A few months later, on January 20, 1965, another woman was found dead. Her name was Eva Pakin, and she was found in the town of Czeladź. She had also been beaten to death. Then, on March 17th, a woman named Lydia Nowacka was killed in Bedzin. On May 14th, in the same city, a woman named Irina Simanska was attacked in the same way, but she did not die. The police saw that these attacks were similar. Because the attacks happened in the Zagłębie-Dąbrowski region, people and newspapers started calling the unknown killer the Zagłębie vampire. The way the killer operated was always similar. He would follow a woman, usually when she was alone. He would run up behind her and strike her in the back of the head with a hard object, like a hammer or a metal bar. He would then continue to beat her until she died. Sometimes, after the victim was dead, he would interfere with the body in a sexual way. However, he never raped the living women. The police found no evidence of that. In some cases, the women's bodies were left with their clothes open to expose them. The attacks did not stop. More women were killed in Bedzin, Sosnowiec, and Chelidze throughout 1965 and 1966. Fear spread everywhere. Women were afraid to go out alone, especially after dark. Men began walking their wives and daughters to work or to the store. Police tried to catch the killer by using policewomen as bait. They dressed policewomen in normal clothes and had them walk alone in areas where the killer might strike. This plan did not work. The killer did not attack these decoys. A very important murder happened on October 11, 1966. A young woman named Jolanta Jirek was killed in Bedzin. Her body was found in the Przemysl River. She was the niece of Edward Jirek, who was a very powerful communist leader in Poland. This murder made the police and government officials very anxious. Finding the vampire became the most important task for the police. They called him Public Enemy Number 1. The killer kept attacking for years. The attacks happened sometimes many months apart, and sometimes closer together. The police received many letters and phone calls from people accusing their neighbors or enemies of being the vampire. The police had to check every one of these tips, which took a lot of time and resources. They did not catch the killer this way. Then, on March 4, 1970, a respected teacher named Jadwiga Kusienka was murdered in Siemianowo-Śląskie. This crime was very brutal. However, the police investigation at the scene showed something new. Evidence suggested that for this murder, the vampire did not act alone. It appeared more than one person was involved. This was a change from all the previous attacks. Around this time, the police also received an anonymous letter. The letter said, "This was the last murder, there will be no more, and you will never catch me." After this, the attacks on women in the region stopped. For over a year after the murder of Jadwiga Kusienka, no new similar attacks occurred. The police investigation into the vampire crimes had slowed down, but it was still open. Then, in November of 1971, the police received a written letter. This letter was from Maria Marchwicki, the wife of Zdzisław Marchwicki. In the letter, she accused her husband of physically abusing her and their children. She also wrote that she believed her husband was the Zagłębie vampire. This letter caused the police to focus on Zdzisław Marchwicki again. Earlier, his name had been on a list of potential suspects because he matched some general characteristics. Now, with this direct accusation from his wife, they acted. On January 6, 1972, a police team led by General Jerzy Gruba went to Dąbrowa Górnicza and arrested Zdzisław Marchwicki at his home. When he was arrested, he reportedly made a strange comment. He said something like, "Well, now finally the vampire has been caught." After his arrest, the police began intense questioning. Marchwicki denied that he was the vampire. However, during interrogations, he sometimes acted strangely. He talked about murder details that had not been made public. At one point, he tried to swallow a piece of paper from his interrogation file. The police were divided. Some officers believed he was guilty, while others doubted it because there was no physical evidence linking him directly to the old crime scenes. The police then focused on the last murder, that of Jadwiga Kusienka, where evidence suggested more than one attacker. They questioned Marchwicki about his family. His brothers, Henryk and Jan, were arrested. Jan Marchwicki worked at the university where Kusienka had been a teacher. Investigators learned that Jan had a conflict with Kusienka. She had accused him of taking bribes and did not approve of his private life. Jan was afraid she would get him fired. The police theory was that Jan had asked his brother Zdzisław to kill Kusienka, and that Henryk had helped. Jan's friend, Josef Klimczak, was also arrested. He told police that Jan had confessed to him about being involved in the teacher's murder. Later, the police also arrested Marchwicki's sister, Halina Flack, and her son, also named Zdzisław. They were accused of dealing with stolen goods from the crimes and for not reporting the crimes to the police. The preparation for the trial took a very long time. The investigation files grew to 166 thick volumes. The trial finally began on September 18, 1974, in Katowice. It was a very public event. People needed special tickets to get into the courtroom to watch. Zdzislaw Marchwicki was charged with 14 murders and 7 attempted murders. His brother Jan was charged with planning the murder of Jadwiga Kusienka. The other family members in Klimczak were charged with helping in that crime or hiding it. The trial lasted for many months. On July 28, 1975, the judge read the verdicts. Zdzislaw Marchwicki and his brother Jan Marchwicki were both sentenced to death. Henryk Marchwicki was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Josef Klimczak received a 12-year sentence. Helena Flack and her son Zdzislaw Flack each received 4-year sentences. Zdzislaw and Jan Marchwicki appealed the sentence, but it was confirmed. On the evening of April 26, 1977, they were executed by hanging in a secured police garage in Katowice. They were buried in unmarked graves in a special cemetery for executed criminals. After the death penalty was abolished in Poland years later, this cemetery was closed and destroyed. In the years after the trial, many people began to doubt whether Zdzislaw Marchwicki was truly the Zagłębie vampire. Lawyers and some former police officers pointed out that he never confessed to the serial murders, only to the one his brother planned. They argued that the police and government were under great pressure to solve the famous case and used Marchwicki as a convenient suspect. No solid physical evidence, like fingerprints or murder weapons tied to him, was ever found for the earlier crimes. The case remains officially closed but is still questioned today. The story of the Zagłębie vampire ended with 2 executions, but the full truth of what happened may never be known. Story 2. Bogdan Arnold was born on February 17, 1933, in the Polish city of Kalisz. Not much is known about his childhood. He attended school like other children. When he was a teenager, he went to a vocational school. This is a type of school where students learn a specific job skill. At this school, Arnold learned to be an electrician. He completed his training and earned his qualification. As a young man, Arnold moved to the industrial city of Katowice. He found a job at the Silesian zinc processing plant. His work there involved manual labor in the factory. He was not a wealthy man, but he earned enough to live. He rented several rooms in an apartment at 14 Dabrowski Street. The apartment was on the 4th floor of the building. Arnold was married 3 different times. Each marriage ended in divorce. His wives left him for similar reasons. They each reported that he was aggressive toward them. They said he committed acts of violence in the home. These incidents are what led to the end of each marriage. The series of failed marriages affected Arnold deeply. After the divorces, he began to drink alcohol heavily. This developed into a serious problem with alcoholism. He also began to form very strong negative feelings about women. He became bitter and angry. He spent most of his time alone in his apartment. His social life was limited to going to bars to drink. His habits became routine. He would work his shift at the zinc plant. After work, he would often go to local bars. He would drink beer and talk to people he met there. He lived a lonely and frustrated life. His neighbors in the apartment building knew him, but they did not know him well. They simply saw him as a quiet, divorced man who kept to himself. Bogdan Arnold committed his first murder on October 12, 1966. On that day, he was drinking at a bar called Kajawiak. There, he met a 30-year-old woman named Maria B. They talked together at the bar. Arnold bought several beers for her. After some time, he invited her back to his apartment at 14 Dabrowski Street. Maria B. agreed to go with him. Once inside his apartment, The woman offered to have sex with Arnold for 500 zlotys. This request made him very angry. In his own words later, he felt he was attractive enough that women should not ask him for money. This anger grew into a sudden rage. He picked up a hammer that was in the apartment. He then hit Maria B. on the head with the hammer multiple times. The blows killed her. After she was dead, Arnold was left with her body in his apartment. He did not know what to do. He decided to try to hide the body and prevent it from smelling. He dragged the body into his bathroom. He then poured a large amount of chlorine, a strong cleaning chemical, over the body. He thought the chlorine would slow down the process of decay. He left the body lying in the bathroom. Months passed. On March 12, 1967, Arnold met another woman. She was a 40-year-old prostitute whose name was never discovered. He met her in a bar and, like before, persuaded her to come to his home. Inside his apartment, he used his hands to strangle her. He choked her until she died. Now he had 2 bodies in his apartment. He needed a new way to hide them. He decided to cut the bodies into smaller pieces. This is called dismemberment. He used sharp tools to cut the body of the second victim into parts. He then did the same thing to the first victim, Maria B., removing her body from the bathroom. He placed all the body parts together and hid them in a corner of one of his rooms. On April 21, 1967, Arnold met a 35-year-old woman named Stephania M. in a bar. He followed the same pattern. He talked to her, drank with her, and then took her to his apartment. Once there, he strangled her to death. After she was dead, he dismembered her body as well. He added her remains to the hidden pile containing the other 2 victims. His final murder happened on May 22, 1967. He brought a 30-year-old prostitute named Helga G. to his apartment. This time, he used a knife. He stabbed her multiple times until she died. He did not dismember this body. Instead, he pushed it under his bed to hide it. By the end of May, there were 4 dead women in Arnold's apartment. The bodies, especially the older ones, had begun to decay severely. This created a very powerful and bad smell. The decay also attracted flies and maggots, which are worms that feed on dead flesh. These insects filled the apartment and started to appear on the landing outside his door. Arnold found he could not stay in the apartment because of the smell and the insects. He stopped coming home. He would sleep elsewhere, often in abandoned buildings. His neighbors noticed he was gone. They also noticed the terrible smell and the swarm of flies at his door. They became worried and suspicious about what was happening inside his apartment. The neighbors at 14 Dabrowski Street were very concerned by the start of June 1967. The foul smell from Bogdan Arnold's 4th-floor apartment had become unbearable. A large swarm of flies was constantly gathered at his door. Arnold had not been seen for several days. Because of this, the building manager decided to call the police on June 1, 1967, to report a problem. Police officers arrived at the apartment building. With permission from the building manager, they forced open the door to Arnold's apartment. Inside, they made a horrible discovery. They found the remains of 4 women in different states of decay. 1 body was under the bed. The dismembered parts of the other 3 were hidden in a room. The apartment was filled with maggots and flies. The smell of death was overpowering. The police immediately sealed off the apartment as a crime scene. The police now knew a serial killer lived there. They identified the tenant as Bogdan Arnold from rental records. Their job was to find him. Arnold was not at his job at the zinc plant. A citywide search for him began. Police looked in his known haunts, like the bars he visited, but he was not there. Arnold was hiding. He knew the bodies had been found. He did not go home or to work. Instead, he slept in an abandoned warehouse near the zinc plant. He stayed there for a week. He did not wash and his clothes became very dirty. On June 8, 1967, a police officer was off duty, but in the area near the zinc plant. He saw a man who looked messy and out of place. The man was Bogdan Arnold. The officer stopped him and asked for his identification papers. Arnold did not have any papers with him. He also could not give a clear reason for why he was so dirty or what he was doing there. The officer first thought Arnold was just a drunk man. He almost let him go, but then he changed his mind. He decided to take the man to the nearest police station for further questioning. At the station, the police took Arnold's fingerprints. They compared these prints to their records. The fingerprints matched those of the tenant from the apartment on Dabrowski Street. The police now knew they had captured Bogdan Arnold. He was placed under arrest. When questioned, Arnold confessed to everything very quickly. He told the police he had killed 4 women. He described how he met them, how he killed them with a hammer, by strangulation, and with a knife, and how he hid the bodies. He also confessed to another crime. He said he had once tried to poison his 3rd wife because he was angry about their divorce. That attempt had failed. During his confession, he showed no remorse for the murders. He only said he was sorry he did not succeed in killing his wife. The police investigation gathered all the evidence. They collected the bodies from his apartment and identified 3 of the 4 victims through missing person reports. They matched Arnold's detailed confession to the evidence found at the scene. The case was very strong against him. Arnold's trial began in early 1968. In court, the prosecutors presented the evidence and his own confession. Arnold did not deny his actions. On March 9, 1968, the judge found Bogdan Arnold guilty of 4 murders and 1 attempted murder. The sentence for these crimes was death by hanging. Arnold was taken to prison to await his execution. On December 16, 1968, the court sentence was carried out. Bogdan Arnold was executed by hanging at the prison. After the execution, his body was buried in a special cemetery for executed criminals. His grave was given a number 38, but it had no name on it. It was an unmarked grave. Over time, the location of this grave was lost, and it no longer exists today. The families of the victims were left to grieve, and a terrible chapter in the city's history was closed. The crimes of Bogdan Arnold were solved by a vigilant neighbor, routine police work, and his own full confession, leading to his arrest and ultimate punishment. Story 3. Ljubomir Megas was born on May 27, 1948, in Zemun, a town in Serbia. For the first 8 years of his life, he lived in Zemun and did not cause major problems. When he was 8 years old, his mother decided to move the family to Belgrade, the capital city. They settled in the Zvezdara neighborhood. This move was a big change for the young boy. In Belgrade, he attended the Cirilo I Metodij primary school. During his early teenage years, he started looking for activities outside of school. He did not focus much on his studies. He wanted to be physically strong. At the age of 13, he joined the Radnicki boxing club. He learned how to box there. This is where he first trained to fight in an organized way. However, he also started fighting outside of the club. He began to get into fights on the streets. He liked to prove he was the strongest. His family did not have much money, and he spent less time at home. He made new friends in his neighborhood. Many of these friends were also interested in fighting and showing toughness. When he finished primary school, he needed to continue his education. He enrolled in a trade school to learn auto repair. He thought this skill could help him get a job, but he did not like school. He often skipped classes. He did not finish his studies at the trade school. He left without a diploma. After leaving school, he needed to work. He found a job at the IMB factory in Dobanovsai. This factory made agricultural machines. His job involved manual labor. He did not work there for a long time. He found the work boring and difficult. He wanted easier money and more excitement. While he was working, he continued his habit of street fighting. His fights became more serious. He started doing more than just fighting. He began to damage property, which is called vandalism. He also started to threaten people. He would tell people to give him things or else he would hurt them. He was building a reputation as a tough and scary young man. People from his old neighborhood in Zemun still knew him. Even though he lived in Belgrade, they called him Ljuba Zemunak. This nickname means Ljuba from Zemun. It stuck with him because it showed where he was originally from. He liked having a nickname that made him sound known. His mother was worried about him. She saw he was often in trouble, but she could not control him. He was becoming an adult and made his own choices. He listened less and less to his family. His main interests were being strong, being feared, and making money without doing factory work. After leaving his job, Ljubomir Megas began committing crimes to get money. His first serious crime happened in 1965. He was 17 years old. He planned and carried out a robbery. The court in Belgrade found him guilty. Because he was still young, he was not sent to a regular prison. Instead, he was sent to a special institution for juvenile offenders. This was a place for young people who broke the law. 1 year later, in 1966, he committed another robbery. He repeated the same type of crime. This time, he was caught in the Serbian city of Niš. The district court in Niš sentenced him again. He spent more time in custody. These experiences in institutions did not make him want to stop committing crimes. They made him more hardened. In 1967, he got into a violent fight at the University of Belgrade's Faculty of Technology. He beat up a student named Vladimir Vukovic. Megas used his boxing skills in this fight. He caused serious injury to the student. After this fight, Megas was afraid. He knew he would be arrested again because of the violence. To avoid arrest, he decided to run away. He quickly crossed the border from Yugoslavia into Austria. This was his first time escaping abroad. He only stayed in Austria for a short time before moving on. Later in the fall of 1967, Megas was involved in a more serious crime. He was with two friends, Rade Kaldovic and Zoran Milosavljevic. They were arrested and charged with rape. The court could not find enough evidence against Kaldovic and Milosavljevic, so they were released. However, Megas was found guilty. The court sentenced him to 2 years and 8 months in the Sremska Mitrovica prison. This was his first adult prison sentence. In prison, he used violence and threats to control other inmates. He forced other prisoners to give him their food and belongings. He made some inmates chew dry, hard bread, so he could shape the soft bread into chess pieces. This showed his desire to dominate everyone around him. He was released from prison in the summer of 1970. In March 1971, Megas was suspected of stealing a car. To avoid another arrest, he escaped from Yugoslavia again. This time, he went to Italy with a criminal friend named Danilo Novakovic. They settled in Milan, Italy. Many criminals from Yugoslavia were in Milan at that time. In Milan, Megas joined a group that did armed robberies. He was very violent during these robberies. His violence made the Italian police notice him. The police did not want him in Italy. They formally expelled him from the country. He was forced to leave Italy. He then went to West Germany. He settled in Offenbach am Main, a town near Frankfurt. Many Yugoslav criminals lived and worked in this area. They often met in a cafe called Zernal in Offenbach and in a cafe called Jukebox Jumbo Jet in Frankfurt. At first, Megas worked as a security guard or bouncer at these places, but he soon started his own criminal group. He used the fake name Tomislav Spadiger. His group specialized in 2 main crimes: armed robbery and racketeering. Racketeering means forcing business owners to pay money for protection. If the owners did not pay, Megas and his men would damage their property or hurt them. He also started a new crime. He began trafficking young women from Serbia to Germany. He would trick them or force them to come with him. Once in Germany, he would take their passports and force them to work as prostitutes. He kept all the money they earned. In June 1974, a man who owned a business, refused to pay Megas the protection money. Megas responded by threatening the man, beating him, and damaging his business. The man went to the police. Megas was arrested by German police for extortion, threats, and assault. While he was dealing with this charge, the Yugoslav police asked Germany to send Megas back. They wanted him for another rape charge in Yugoslavia. In December 1974, Germany refused this request. But in May 1975, the German police arrested Megas again in Frankfurt. This time, it was for using fake identity papers, robbery, and driving without a license. Because of these new crimes, Germany agreed to send him back to Yugoslavia. In September 1975, he was extradited. In Yugoslavia, he was tried for rape and sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. He was released from prison in 1978. Shortly after his release, in the fall of 1978, he committed another rape in the town of Budva. After this crime, he immediately fled back to West Germany to avoid arrest. He lived in Frankfurt under another fake name, Giovanni Angelis. On October 27, 1978, a well-known criminal named Veljko Krivokapic was murdered. Krivokapic had gambled and owed money to Megas' friend, Rade Kaldovic. Kaldovic decided to kill Krivokapic over this debt. Police sources and other criminals later said that Megas and another man named Jusuf Bulik helped Kaldovic carry out the murder. In January 1980, because of the 1978 rape in Budva, an international arrest warrant was issued for Megas. The West German police acted on this warrant. They arrested him and sent him back to Yugoslavia on February 20, 1981. He stood trial in Titograd and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He appealed the sentence. The Supreme Court ordered a new trial. In October 1982, after already serving 20 months, he was allowed to leave prison on bail. Instead of staying in Yugoslavia for his new trial, he broke the rules of his bail and went back to West Germany. Back in Frankfurt in 1983, he was arrested again. This was part of a large police action against around 20 Yugoslav criminals. They were charged with extortion, blackmail, and armed robbery. However, the evidence against Megas was weak. The court could not convict him. He was set free. This made other criminals think he was vulnerable. A younger criminal named Goran Vukovic saw this as a chance to take power. Vukovic began committing crimes like robbing a jewelry shop without asking for Megas' permission. This was a direct challenge to Megas' authority. Megas was angry about this challenge. In January 1985, he decided to kill Goran Vukovic. Megas and 2 of his associates, Slobodan Savic and Vlada Baker, found Vukovic and his friend Boris Petkov. Savic shot at them. Vukovic was wounded but survived. Petkov was not hurt. The German police arrested Megas for this attempted murder. However, during the trial, witnesses changed their stories. Some people even gave Megas a false alibi, saying he was somewhere else at the time of the shooting. One of these people was a famous football coach. Because of this lack of solid evidence, the court found Megas not guilty. He was released. The conflict between Megas and Vukovic did not end. It grew more intense. Both men moved around Frankfurt with groups of armed friends for protection. They both knew a final confrontation was coming. On the morning of November 10, 1986, Ljubomir Megas had to go to the Frankfurt courthouse for a minor legal matter. He arrived with several of his associates for protection. At the same time, Goran Vukovic also had business at the same courthouse. He arrived with his own group of armed men. This meeting was not planned by either side, but both knew the other frequented the court building. Just before 10:30 a.m., Megas and Vukovic saw each other on the sidewalk in front of the courthouse entrance. They were only a few meters apart. Their groups of men faced each other. An argument started immediately. The argument was loud and full of threats about their past conflicts. During this confrontation, Goran Vukovic suddenly pulled out a handgun. He did not aim for a long time. He quickly raised the weapon and fired 2 shots directly at Megas' chest from close range. The shooting happened in a public place in broad daylight. Many people outside the courthouse saw and heard the gunshots. These people included other citizens, lawyers, and court employees. Someone immediately used a phone to call the police. The emergency call reported a shooting with injuries at the courthouse address. Megas fell to the ground. He was bleeding heavily from his chest wounds. His associates surrounded him, but could not help him medically. They were also in danger of being shot. Vukovic and his men did not fire more shots. They began to move away from the scene quickly. However, the police response was very fast because the courthouse is in a major city center. Police cars and an ambulance arrived within minutes. The police officers saw Vukovic and his group trying to leave. The officers detained them at the scene. Witnesses pointed to Vukovic as the shooter. The police found the handgun used in the shooting on Vukovic's person. They formally arrested him for attempted murder. Meanwhile, medical paramedics worked on Megas at the scene. They provided emergency care and then rushed him to a nearby hospital. At the hospital, doctors performed emergency surgery on Megas. They tried to repair the damage to his heart and lungs caused by the bullets. The surgery lasted for hours. However, the injuries were too severe. In the afternoon of the same day, November 10th, 1986, Lyubomir Megas died from his wounds in the hospital. The charge against Goran Vukovic was then upgraded from attempted murder to murder. The investigation was straightforward because it happened in front of many witnesses. The police detectives collected statements from everyone who saw the event. All the witness statements matched. They all said Vukovic pulled the trigger. The physical evidence also matched. The bullets removed from Megas' body during the autopsy came from Vukovic's gun. There was no doubt about who committed the act. The German prosecutor's office built a strong case. The trial took place in a German court. Vukovic's defense lawyers argued that there was a long-standing feud and that Vukovic felt threatened by Megas. However, the judge and jury saw that Vukovic had carried a gun to the courthouse and had fired first. The court found Goran Vukovic guilty of murder. He was sentenced to a long term in a German prison. The murder of Megas ended his control over the criminal activities in Frankfurt. Other criminals, including his old friends from Yugoslavia, took over his racketeering and prostitution businesses. The police did not solve all the past crimes Megas was suspected of, like the murder of Veljko Krivokapic, because the main suspect was now dead. Goran Vukovic served his prison sentence in Germany. After many years, he was released from prison. He returned to a life of crime, but was later killed himself in a gang shooting in 1994, showing that the violent cycle continued. The young women Megas had trafficked were freed from his control after his death. Some returned to Yugoslavia, while others stayed in Germany, often with help from social services. The business owners he had extorted no longer had to pay him money, but other criminals soon came to demand payments instead. The story of Lyubomir Megas shows how a life of violence that began with street fighting often ends with a violent death. Story 4. Radovan Karadžić was born on June 19, 1945, in a small village called Petnjica. This village was in Montenegro, which was part of a larger country called Yugoslavia. His family were Serbs. His father, Vuko, repaired shoes for a living. His mother, Jovanka, worked on a farm. When Radovan was very young, his father was sent to prison. The government at the time was communist, and his father had fought for a different group during World War II. Because of this, Radovan grew up mostly without his father at home. In 1960, when he was 15 years old, Karadžić moved to the city of Sarajevo in Bosnia. He went there to study. He attended the University of Sarajevo's medical school. He decided to specialize in psychiatry, which is the study and treatment of mental illness. He was a good student. After his basic studies, he went to other countries for more training. He worked at a hospital in Denmark for a year, studying depression and other disorders. Later, he received special training at Columbia University in New York City in the United States. When he returned to Yugoslavia, he got a job as a doctor at the Kosevo Hospital in Sarajevo. He worked in the psychiatry department. During this time, he also wrote poetry. He enjoyed literature and became friends with some well-known Serbian writers. One of these writers, Dobrica Kozic, encouraged him to think about politics. For a while, Karadzic also showed interest in environmental issues. During this period, he was known to make statements against extreme nationalism. In his personal life, Karadzic started a family. He married his wife, Ljiljana, in 1965. They had 2 children, a son named Alexander and a daughter named Sonia. He built a house in a town called Pale near Sarajevo. This was a popular ski resort area. His career as a doctor had some problems. In the early 1980s, he began working at a hospital in a suburb of Belgrade, the capital of Serbia. He and a business partner, Momcilo Krajisnik, got a large loan from a government fund meant for farming. They used this money to build their own houses in Pale. This was not the purpose of the loan. Because of this, in November 1984, Karadzic and his partner were arrested for fraud. Karadzic spent 11 months in jail waiting for his trial. A friend eventually helped him get out. His trial happened in September 1985. The court found him guilty of fraud and embezzlement. He was given a 3-year prison sentence. However, because he had already spent nearly a year in detention, he did not have to go back to prison to serve the rest of the sentence. He was released. After this, Karadzic returned to his work in medicine and his writing. The political situation in Yugoslavia was beginning to change. The country was made up of many different republics and ethnic groups, and tensions were growing. In 1989, encouraged by his writer friends, Karadzic helped to found a new political party in Bosnia. The party was called the Serb Democratic Party. Its main goal was to represent the interests of Serbs living in Bosnia. The party grew quickly. Karadzic became its public leader. He gave speeches and attended meetings. The party argued that if Bosnia decided to leave the country of Yugoslavia, the Serbs living in Bosnia should stay connected to Serbia. During 1991, as other republics moved toward independence, Karadzic's party set up its own councils and assemblies in areas where many Serbs lived. They held a referendum where Bosnian Serbs voted to remain part of Yugoslavia. In early 1992, the political situation became much more tense. On March 1, 1992, Bosnia and Herzegovina held a referendum to become independent from Yugoslavia. Most Serbs, following the instructions of Karadzic's party, did not vote. The referendum passed. In response, on April 6, 1992, Karadzic's Serb Democratic Party declared the creation of a new Serbian state within Bosnia, called the Republika Srpska. Radovan Karadzic was chosen as its president. Very soon after this declaration, armed conflict began between Bosnian Serb forces, the Bosnian army, and Croat forces. As the political leader, Karadzic had command over the Bosnian Serb army, known as the VRS. He worked closely with the army's general, Ratko Mladic. One of the first major military actions was against Bosnia's capital city, Sarajevo. Although many Serbs had left the city, it was still home to hundreds of thousands of Bosnian Muslims, Bosniaks, and Croats. In April 1992, Bosnian Serb forces surrounded Sarajevo. They blocked all roads in and out. They took up positions in the hills around the city. This began the siege of Sarajevo. The siege involved constant shelling and sniper fire into the city. The people inside could not leave and had little food, water, medicine, or electricity. The shelling targeted homes, markets, hospitals, and schools. Snipers specifically shot at civilians, including children and the elderly, as they tried to cross streets or gather water. This created a state of constant terror. The goal was to force the Bosnian government to surrender and to drive non-Serbs out of the city. Karadzic, as president, supported and directed this strategy. In other areas of Bosnia claimed by the Republika Srpska, a different campaign began. The goal was to remove all Bosniaks and Croats from these territories to create ethnically pure Serbian land. This process is called ethnic cleansing. Bosnian Serb military and police forces, following plans created by political leaders including Karadzic, entered villages and towns. They would round up the non-Serb civilians. Men and women were often separated. The forces established detention camps. The most infamous were in the Prihedor region, such as Omarska, Karaterm, and Trinopolj. Thousands of Bosniaks and Croats were forced into these camps. Conditions were brutal. Prisoners were given very little food or water. They were beaten, tortured, and killed regularly. Many died from the poor conditions or were executed. Women were subjected to systematic rape. These camps were not secret. International journalists eventually filmed them, showing the world the emaciated prisoners. A key event happened in the town of Srebrenica. This was a UN-declared safe area, where thousands of Bosniaks had fled for protection. In July 1995, Bosnian Serb forces under General Mladic attacked and overran Srebrenica. Karadzic, as the political commander, had approved the operation. The Bosnian Serb forces separated the Bosniak population. They bused the women, children, and elderly to other territories. They then systematically executed the men and boys. Over several days, more than 8,000 Bosniak males were killed. Their bodies were buried in mass graves. This was the Srebrenica genocide. Throughout the war, Karadzic's government and military used terror as a weapon. They shelled civilian areas of cities like Sarajevo and Markale Marketplace to spread fear. They took UN peacekeepers hostage, chaining them to potential targets to stop NATO airstrikes. All of these actions, the siege, the camps, the mass executions, were part of a planned strategy to remove non-Serbs from large parts of Bosnia. As president, Karadzic was at the top of the chain of command. He gave speeches encouraging the fight, signed orders, and met with military leaders to plan operations. The war ended in late 1995 with the Dayton Peace Agreement. By then, hundreds of thousands of people had been killed or displaced. Karadzic remained as the political leader of the Republika Srpska for a short time after the war. In 1995, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, ICTY, had already indicted him for war crimes, but he was still free. In July 1996, after his indictment by the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, ICTY, Radovan Karadzic disappeared from public life. He became a fugitive. To avoid capture, he used a false identity. He changed his appearance completely. He grew a long white beard and long hair, which he often wore in a ponytail. He began wearing glasses and distinctive clothing, like large hats and robes. He called himself Dr. Dragan David Dabic, an alternative medicine specialist. For over 12 years, he lived openly in Belgrade, Serbia, using this fake name. He worked at a private medical clinic. He gave public lectures on human quantum energy and sold herbal remedies. He even wrote articles for a healthy living magazine. During this time, international forces and police searched for him, but they did not find him. There were raids and arrests of people who helped him, but Karadzic himself remained free. The Serbian government, under pressure, eventually took more serious steps to find him. His capture was the result of a long intelligence operation. Serbian security services were monitoring a network of people suspected of helping war crimes fugitives. They were not tracking Karadzik directly at first, but they were investigating the people around him. Through this surveillance, they eventually identified a person of interest who was the disguised Karadzik. They confirmed his identity by comparing a photo of the alternative medicine healer Dabik to a digitally altered image of how Karadzik might look. On July 21, 2008, Serbian security officers arrested Karadzik on a bus in a Belgrade suburb. He did not resist arrest. He was taken to a special courtroom for war crimes in Belgrade. A few days later, he was extradited to the Netherlands to stand trial before the ICTY in The Hague. He arrived there on July 30, 2008. His trial was one of the most significant at the tribunal. Karadzik decided to represent himself without a lawyer. At first, he refused to enter a plea, so the court recorded a plea of not guilty for him on all 11 charges. He argued that the tribunal was illegal and that he was immune from prosecution because of a supposed deal made with an American diplomat. The court rejected all these arguments. The trial officially began in October 2009, but Karadzik boycotted the start, causing delays. The court eventually assigned a lawyer to assist him to ensure the trial could proceed fairly. The prosecution presented its case from 2010 to 2012. They called hundreds of witnesses. These included survivors of the siege of Sarajevo, survivors of the detention camps, and mothers and sisters of men killed in Srebrenica. The prosecution also presented forensic evidence from mass graves, official documents signed by Karadzik, and intercepted phone calls. They showed how military and political structures worked together, proving Karadzik's central role as president and supreme commander. The defense presented its case from 2012 to 2014. Karadzik argued that he was not responsible for the crimes committed. He claimed the war was a civil conflict between 3 sides, and that his goal was only to protect Serbs. He stated that the killings in Srebrenica were revenge attacks by rogue soldiers and not a planned genocide. He denied ordering the siege of Sarajevo to target civilians. He chose not to testify himself. After years of testimony and evidence, the judges deliberated. On March 24, 2016, they delivered their verdict. They found Radovan Karadzik guilty of 10 of the 11 charges. He was found guilty of genocide for the killings in Srebrenica. He was found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity for the siege of Sarajevo, the campaign of ethnic cleansing, the taking of UN hostages, and the use of terror against civilians. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Both Karadzik and the prosecutors appealed the verdict. The prosecutors argued the 40-year sentence was too lenient for his crimes. Karadzik appealed his convictions. On March 20, 2019, the appeals judges made a final ruling. They upheld all of his convictions. They agreed with the prosecutors that the original sentence was too short. They increased his sentence to life imprisonment. In May 2021, it was announced he would serve his sentence in a prison in the United Kingdom. He was transferred to HM Prison Parkhurst on the Isle of Wight, where he remains incarcerated. The victims of the crimes, including the families of those killed in Srebrenica and the survivors of Sarajevo, have stated that while justice was delivered, the loss and pain caused can never be undone. Radovan Karadzik will spend the rest of his life in prison for his crimes. Story 5. Ratko Mladic was born on March 12, 1943, in the small village of Bozanovice. This village was located in a region that, at the time of his birth, was part of the independent state of Croatia. This was a political entity created during World War II. His father, whose name was Nada Mladic, was a member of the Yugoslav partisans. The partisans were a resistance army fighting against the occupying forces during the war. When Ratko Mladic was 2 years old, his father was killed in combat. This happened on the boy's 3rd birthday. As a result, his mother, Stana, was left alone to raise 3 young children, a daughter named Milica, Ratko, and a younger son named Milivoj. The family lived in difficult conditions after the war, like many others in the region. His mother worked very hard to provide for the family by herself. After finishing elementary school, the young Ratko Mladic moved to the city of Sarajevo. He found a job there as a metalworker, specifically a whitesmith, for a company called Predis. This was physical, industrial work. However, he did not continue on this career path for long. In 1961, when he was 18 years old, he decided to join the military. He entered the military industry school located in the town of Zeman. Following this school, he continued his military education. He attended the KOV Military Academy and then the Officers Academy. He studied and trained to become a professional soldier. He graduated from the Officers Academy on September 27, 1965. Immediately after graduating, he began his official career as an officer in the Yugoslav People's Army, which was the unified army of the country of Yugoslavia. In the same year, he also joined the League of Communists of Yugoslavia, which was the ruling political party in the country. His first assignment as a young officer was in the city of Skopje on November 4, 1965. He was made a commander of a unit, and he was the youngest soldier in that unit. He started with the low rank of second lieutenant in April 1968. He was seen as a capable and disciplined officer. Because of this, he was given more responsibility over time. He commanded a platoon in May 1970. Later, in November 1974, he was put in command of a battalion, which is a larger group of soldiers. In September 1976, Mladic began advanced military education at the Command and Staff Academy in Belgrade, the capital city. He performed very well in his studies, finishing first in his class. After completing this education, his career continued to progress. On December 25, 1980, he was promoted to the rank of lieutenant colonel. Several years later, on August 18, 1986, he was promoted again to the rank of colonel. His posting at this time was in the city of Stip. He finished another year of specialized military education in September 1986. On January 31, 1989, he was given a new role as the head of the education department for the 3rd Military District, which was based in Skopje. His final promotion before the major conflicts began was on January 14, 1991. On this date, he was made the deputy commander of the Army Corps in the city of Pristina, which is in the region of Kosovo. During his personal life, he married a woman named Bosiljka. They had 2 children together. Their son was named Darko, and their daughter was named Anna. His military career required frequent moves and long absences from his family, which was common for army officers at the time. His life, until this point, was defined by a steady rise through the ranks of a large, organized national army. In June 1991, Ratko Mladic was given command of the 9th Corps of the Yugoslav People's Army, JNA. This happened as tensions grew in Yugoslavia, which was beginning to break apart into separate republics. His forces were deployed in a region known as Nin, which was part of Croatia but had a large Serbian population. Here, he led military actions against Croatian forces during the opening conflicts of the Croatian War of Independence. His unit was involved in operations like the siege of the village of Kijevo and battles near the city of Zadar. On April 24, 1992, Mladic was promoted to the rank of Lieutenant Colonel General. Around this time, the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina declared its independence. Mladic, as a senior JNA officer still in Bosnia, acted to secure territory for Bosnian Serbs who opposed independence. On May 2, 1992, he and other generals ordered the blockade of the city of Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. They positioned artillery and snipers in the hills surrounding the city. They cut off all major roads, stopping the supply of food, water, electricity, and medicine into the city. This marked the beginning of the siege of Sarajevo, which would last for nearly 4 years. On May 12, 1992, the political leaders of the Bosnian Serbs created a new army called the Army of Republika Srpska, VRS. Ratko Mladic was appointed as the commander of its main staff, making him the top military leader of the Bosnian Serb forces. In this role, he had direct command over all army operations. The siege of Sarajevo continued under his command. Shells from artillery and mortars fired by his forces regularly fell on the city. Snipers under his command shot at civilians in the streets. These attacks targeted places where people gathered, such as markets, water lines, and funeral processions. The goal was to terrorize the civilian population, which was mostly Bosnian Muslim, Bosniak, and Croat. In July 1995, Mladic's VRS forces attacked an area in eastern Bosnia called Srebrenica. The United Nations had declared Srebrenica a safe area for civilians. However, the VRS soldiers overran the lightly armed UN peacekeepers stationed there. Tens of thousands of Bosniak civilians fled to the UN base at Podakari. Mladic arrived in Srebrenica and personally oversaw the operation. In televised images, he was seen calming the crowds, promising them safety. Meanwhile, his soldiers began separating the Bosniak civilians by gender and age. The VRS forces took all the Bosniak men and boys, from teenagers to the elderly, away from the women and small children. They claimed these men were being taken away for questioning about potential war crimes. Instead, the soldiers transported the men and boys to various isolated locations, warehouses, schools, and fields in the surrounding region. Over the next several days, from July 13th to July 22nd, 1995, VRS military units systematically executed these prisoners. The victims were shot by firing squads or killed individually. Their bodies were buried in mass graves using bulldozers. The United Nations and international observers later determined that approximately 8,000 Bosniak men and boys were killed in this organized massacre. During the same period, Mladic's forces also attacked another UN safe area at Zepa. The VRS shelled this town and captured it. The civilian population was forcibly expelled. Throughout the war, Mladic's headquarters issued orders and directives to units involved in these operations. His command was responsible for the sustained artillery bombardment of Sarajevo and for the military campaign that resulted in the capture of Srebrenica and the events that followed. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, ICTY, was created by the United Nations in 1993 to investigate war crimes committed during the conflicts. Prosecutors at the ICTY began collecting evidence against Ratko Mladic while the war was still ongoing. On July 24, 1995, just days after the Srebrenica massacre, the ICTY issued its first indictment against Mladic. He was charged with genocide, crimes against humanity, and violations of the laws of war for the siege of Sarajevo. On November 16, 1995, the indictment was expanded to include charges of genocide for the events at Srebrenica. An international arrest warrant was issued for him. After the war ended in late 1995, Mladic was removed from his military command in 1996. He then became a fugitive. For many years, he evaded capture. He initially lived openly in Serbia and was even seen at public events. After the Serbian government began cooperating more with the ICTY in the early 2000s, he went into hiding. It was widely believed that he was being protected by elements within the Serbian military and police. The United States government offered a reward of $5 million for information leading to his arrest. The Serbian government also offered a large reward. Despite numerous reported sightings in Serbia, Bosnia, and even Russia, he was not caught. The pressure to arrest Mladic was strongly linked to Serbia's desire to join the European Union. The EU stated that full cooperation with the ICTY, including arresting Mladic, was a required step. For years, Serbia's failure to find him harmed its relationship with Europe. Serbian police and intelligence agencies conducted many raids over the years, but they were unsuccessful. In 2010, Serbia increased the reward for his capture to 10 million euros, showing a renewed effort to find him. The breakthrough came from a long-term surveillance operation. Serbian security agencies had been monitoring the relatives of Ratko Mladic. They focused on his cousin, Branislav Mladic. On the morning of May 26, 2011, Serbian special police officers in unmarked vehicles raided a house in the village of Lazarevo in northern Serbia. The house belonged to Branislav. The officers entered the house and found an elderly man. They asked him to identify himself. The man stated he was Ratko Mladic. He was arrested without a struggle, and 2 pistols were taken from him. He was not in disguise and appeared to have aged significantly. He had suffered several strokes, which had partially paralyzed one of his arms. After his arrest, Mladic was taken to Belgrade, the capital of Serbia. A court hearing was held to determine if he was healthy enough to be sent to the ICTY. Doctors examined him and found him stable. The court ruled he could be extradited. On May 31, 2011, he was put on a plane and flown to the Netherlands. He was placed in the ICTY detention unit in The Hague to await trial. His trial began on May 16, 2012. It was a very long process, lasting over 5 years. Prosecutors presented thousands of pages of documents, videos, and audio recordings. They called hundreds of witnesses, including survivors of the siege of Sarajevo and the Srebrenica massacre. Forensic experts presented evidence from mass graves. The prosecution argued that as the commander, Mladic was responsible for the crimes committed by his soldiers. The defense argued that he was just a soldier following orders and that he did not intend to commit genocide. On November 22, 2017, the judges of the ICTY delivered their verdict. They found Ratko Mladic guilty of 10 of the 11 charges against him. He was found guilty of 1 count of genocide for the killings at Srebrenica. He was found guilty of 5 counts of crimes against humanity for acts including persecution, extermination, and murder across Bosnia. He was also found guilty of 4 counts of violations of the laws of war, including the siege of Sarajevo. He was acquitted of 1 count of genocide related to other municipalities in Bosnia. The judges stated that he was a key planner and instigator of a campaign to permanently remove Bosnian Muslims and Croats from Serb-claimed territory. Because of the extreme gravity of his crimes, the judges sentenced him to life in prison. Mladic's lawyers appealed the verdict. The appeal was heard by a different court called the Mechanism for International Criminal Tribunals. On June 8, 2021, the appeals judges upheld all of his convictions and confirmed his life sentence. His legal appeals were finished. Ratko Mladic remains in a prison in The Hague, serving a sentence of life imprisonment for his crimes. The story of Ratko Mladic is closed by the final judgment of international law. Story 6. Slobodan Milosevic was born on August 20, 1941, in the town of Požarevac in Serbia. His birth happened during a time of war, as foreign armies occupied the country. He grew up in a family where both of his parents were school teachers. His family life was not stable. His father, Svitozar, left the family home when Slobodan was a young boy. His mother, Stanislava, raised Slobodan and his older brother, Borislav, mostly on her own. His childhood was marked by the aftermath of World War II and the establishment of a new communist government in Yugoslavia. He was a serious boy and a good student. In school, he was known for being quiet and well-dressed. He was not particularly outgoing, but he formed a few strong friendships. One of his closest childhood friends was a girl named Mirjana Markovic. After finishing secondary school, Milosevic moved to the big city of Belgrade to study law at the University of Belgrade. This was a common path for smart young people who wanted a stable career in the state system. At university, he was not a standout student politically at first. He joined the official communist youth organization, which was normal for someone aiming for a professional future. It was here that he met a fellow student named Ivan Stambolic. This friendship became very important. Stambolic came from a family that was already powerful within the Communist Party structure. After graduating in 1964, Milosevic began a steady career as a banker and economic manager. His friend Stambolic helped him get good jobs. Milosevic worked first as an economic advisor to the mayor of Belgrade. Later, he became the director of a large state-owned gas company, and then the head of one of Yugoslavia's biggest banks. These jobs involved managing money and people, and they required him to be efficient and loyal to the state system. He traveled to Western countries like the United States and France for his banking work, which gave him experience with the world outside Yugoslavia. In his personal life, he married his childhood friend, Mirjana Markovic, in 1965. They had 2 children, a son named Marko and a daughter named Maria. Mirjana was also a university professor and a committed communist. People who knew them said she had a strong influence on his political thinking. Their family life was considered private and closed off from others. During these early years, there were personal tragedies. His father, who had become a religious scholar, died by suicide in 1962. His mother also died by suicide 10 years later, in 1972. These events affected him, but he did not speak about them publicly. He continued to focus on his career. Through the 1970s and early 1980s, Milosevic was a loyal communist official. He rose through the ranks of the League of Communists of Serbia, the only political party allowed in the country. His rise was steady, not fast. He was seen as a capable technocrat, a manager, not a fiery speaker or an ideological leader. His patron was still his old friend, Ivan Stambolic, who by the mid-1980s had become the president of Serbia. Milosevic's job within the party was handling ideology and propaganda. This meant he was responsible for how the party's message was communicated to the public. He learned how the media worked and how public opinion could be shaped. For a long time, he was a background figure supporting his friend Stambolic. He lived a comfortable, quiet life as a senior state official, managing the affairs of his bank and his party committee. Milosevic's role changed fundamentally in 1987. He was sent by the party to a meeting in Kosovo, a province of Serbia where many ethnic Albanians lived. At the time, there were tensions between the local Albanian population and the Serb minority there. During the meeting, a large crowd of local Serbs gathered outside, clashing with police. Milosevic came out and told the crowd, "No one should dare to beat you again." This statement was filmed and widely shown on Serbian state television. It presented him as a defender of Serbs, which made him very popular with many people in Serbia who felt neglected. This event became a turning point. Milosevic began to use this new popularity to take control of the Communist Party in Serbia. He turned against his old friend and patron, Ivan Stambolic. Through a series of political maneuvers inside party meetings, Milosevic and his supporters forced Stambolic to resign from his position as president of Serbia in 1987. Milosevic then took his place. This was not a public election, it was an internal party takeover. Now in power, Milosevic began a campaign to centralize control. He argued that the provinces of Kosovo and Vojvodina had too much autonomy or self-rule, and that this weakened Serbia. In 1988 and 1989, his supporters organized large street protests in the capitals of Vojvodina and Montenegro. These protests, called the Anti-Bureaucratic Revolution, forced the local governments to resign. They were replaced by leaders who were loyal to Milosevic. This meant that instead of Yugoslavia being a federation of equal parts, Milosevic now directly or indirectly controlled Serbia, Vojvodina, Kosovo, and Montenegro. This created great fear and anger in the other republics of Yugoslavia, like Slovenia, Croatia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. In 1989, the Serbian parliament, under Milosevic's control, changed the Serbian constitution. The changes took away most of the self-rule that the provinces of Kosovo and Vojvodina had. This was done against the wishes of the majority of people in Kosovo, who were ethnic Albanians. When the parliament in Kosovo was forced to vote on this, it happened under the presence of special police forces from Serbia. Widespread protests by Albanians in Kosovo followed, which were put down by police. This marked the end of Kosovo's autonomy. In 1990, the one-party communist system ended. Milosevic transformed the old Communist League into the Socialist Party of Serbia and won the first multi-party elections. He now controlled the government, the police, and crucially, the state television and major newspapers. This control of media became a key tool. The media began to broadcast a constant stream of reports that emphasized Serbian victimhood, warned of threats from other ethnic groups, and glorified Milosevic as a national leader. This propaganda fueled fear and nationalism among Serbs. When Croatia and Slovenia declared independence from Yugoslavia in 1991, war broke out. Milosevic, as leader of Serbia, controlled the Yugoslav People's Army, JNA, along with other federal leaders. The JNA initially intervened to try to keep the country together, but its actions quickly aligned with Serbian nationalist goals. In Croatia, the army provided weapons and support to ethnic Serbian rebels who wanted to stay part of a Serb-dominated state. Towns like Vukovar were destroyed by shelling. As the war progressed, the Serbian government under Milosevic continued to fund and supply the Serb forces in Croatia, even as those forces committed acts of violence against Croatian civilians, forcing them from their homes in a process known as ethnic cleansing. The same pattern repeated in Bosnia and Herzegovina when it declared independence in 1992. Bosnian Serbs, led by Radovan Karadzic, wanted to create their own state and join Serbia. Milosevic's government in Belgrade provided critical support. This included funding, weapons, ammunition, and fuel for the Bosnian Serb army. Officers from the Yugoslav army were transferred to lead the Bosnian Serb forces. Paramilitary groups from Serbia, which committed some of the worst atrocities, were organized and armed with the knowledge and support of state security forces loyal to Milosevic. The objective was to create ethnically pure Serbian territories by forcibly removing Bosnian Muslims, Bosniaks, and Croats. This led to systematic campaigns of violence. Cities like Sarajevo were placed under siege for years, with snipers and artillery shelling civilians. In towns across Bosnia, non-Serbs were rounded up. Men were often sent to detention camps where they were beaten and killed, and women and children were expelled. The most notorious single event was the massacre in Srebrenica in July 1995. Bosnian Serb forces, led by General Ratko Mladic, overran a UN-declared safe area and systematically killed more than 8,000 Bosniak men and boys. During this time, Milosevic maintained his role as the political leader of Serbia and the primary supporter of the Bosnian Serbs. Throughout the wars, Milosevic publicly presented himself as a peacemaker and a statesman. He engaged in international negotiations. However, the military and financial support from Belgrade to the Serb forces in Croatia and Bosnia continued, enabling the wars and the atrocities to persist for years. The crimes committed included mass murder, torture, rape, imprisonment, and the deportation of hundreds of thousands of people from their homes based solely on their ethnicity. As the wars in Croatia and Bosnia raged, the international community began to document the atrocities. United Nations agencies, human rights groups, and journalists reported on mass graves, detention camps, and the systematic expulsion of civilians. In response, the United Nations Security Council established the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, ICTY, in 1993, based in The Hague, Netherlands. This was a court created specifically to prosecute war crimes from the conflicts. The ICTY prosecutors began gathering evidence. They collected thousands of documents, satellite images, and eyewitness testimonies from victims and insiders. Their investigations showed that the crimes were not random acts, but part of a coordinated plan to create ethnically Serb territories. The court issued indictments against military leaders and political figures from all sides of the wars. Initially, Slobodan Milosevic was not indicted. He was still the president of Yugoslavia and was treated as a negotiating partner for peace deals, like the Dayton Agreement, which ended the Bosnian War in 1995. However, in 1998, conflict broke out in Kosovo between Serbian security forces and the ethnic Albanian Kosovo Liberation Army, KLA. Serbian police and military units used extreme force, leading to civilian deaths and the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Albanians. NATO intervened with a bombing campaign against Yugoslavia in 1999 to stop the violence. During the NATO bombing, on May 24, 1999, the ICTY prosecutor announced the indictment of Slobodan Milosevic. He was charged with crimes against humanity and violations of the laws of war in Kosovo. The indictment stated that he was criminally responsible for the deportation of 800,000 Albanians and the murders of hundreds. This made him the first sitting head of state to be charged with war crimes by an international tribunal. For over a year after the indictment, Milosevic remained in power in Yugoslavia. His political downfall began in September 2000 when he lost a presidential election to opposition candidate Vojislav Koštunica. Milosevic initially refused to accept the result, but massive street protests in Belgrade forced him to concede in October 2000. The new government, led by Prime Minister Zoran Đinđić, wanted to rebuild ties with the West and receive international financial aid. Under intense pressure from the United States and European Union, which linked aid to cooperation with the ICTY, the new Yugoslav government arrested Milosevic on April 1, 2001, on local charges of corruption and abuse of power. A legal and political battle followed over whether to send him to The Hague. President Koštunica opposed it, arguing it was unconstitutional. Prime Minister Đinđić bypassed the Constitutional Court and ordered Milosevic's extradition on June 28, 2001. He was flown to the Netherlands and surrendered to the ICTY. His trial began on February 12, 2002. Milosevic refused to recognize the court's legitimacy and chose to represent himself. The prosecution's case was massive, covering 3 wars over 66 counts, including genocide in Bosnia and crimes against humanity in Croatia and Kosovo. The trial lasted over 4 years. Prosecutors presented hundreds of witnesses, including victims, soldiers, and former high-level allies of Milosevic, who testified about his command role and the systematic nature of the crimes. They presented documents linking his government to the financing and supply of Serb forces in Bosnia and Croatia. Milosevic used his self-defense to argue that the wars were civil conflicts for which he bore no responsibility, that the tribunal was illegal, and that he was the victim of a NATO conspiracy. The trial was repeatedly delayed due to his poor health. He suffered from severe hypertension and heart problems. On March 11, 2006, before the trial could conclude, Slobodan Milosevic was found dead in his prison cell. The official autopsy determined he died of a heart attack. The tribunal denied any wrongdoing, stating he had not been taking his prescribed medication properly. Although he never received a verdict, the ICTY continued its work. In subsequent trials of other Serbian and Bosnian Serb officials, the court established factual records. In its 2007 verdict against Milan Martic, a Croatian Serb leader, the ICTY concluded that Martic was part of a joint criminal enterprise that included Slobodan Milosevic, whose aim was to forcibly remove non-Serbs from large parts of Croatia and Bosnia to create a unified Serbian state. Similar findings were made in trials concerning crimes in Kosovo. In a separate case, the International Court of Justice ruled in 2007 that Serbia under Milosevic had violated the Genocide Convention by failing to prevent the genocide in Srebrenica and failing to punish those responsible, though it found no evidence directly linking Belgrade to the commission of the genocide itself. After his death, Milosevic was buried privately in his hometown of Požarevac. His legacy remains deeply divisive in Serbia and the Balkans. For some, he is a nationalist defender, while for the international community and his victims, he was the central figure responsible for the wars and atrocities that tore Yugoslavia apart. The judicial process he faced established a permanent historical record of the crimes committed under his authority. The International Tribunal established the facts of his responsibility, but he ultimately eluded a final judicial verdict due to his death. Story 7. Dražen Erdemovic was born on November 25, 1971, in the industrial city of Tuzla. This city was part of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which itself was one of the 6 republics inside the larger country of Yugoslavia. His mother was an ethnic Croat, and his father was an ethnic Serb. This mixed family was common in Tuzla, a place where different groups often lived together peacefully. He grew up in a working-class family. His parents were not strongly nationalistic. They considered themselves Yugoslavs, an identity that meant being above any single ethnic group. As a boy, Dražen enjoyed sports and spent time with friends from all backgrounds. His childhood was normal and quiet. He finished his compulsory education in Tuzla. He was not a top student, but he did well enough. After school, he found work in a bakery and later as a construction worker. He struggled to find a stable, well-paying job. In December 1990, when he was 19, he had to report for his mandatory military service. He served in the Yugoslav People's Army, or JNA. He was stationed in Serbia for his training. This was a normal requirement for all young men. After his basic training, his unit was sent to eastern Croatia during the early conflicts there in 1991. He was present during the Battle of Vukovar, though he was not a frontline combat soldier. He served as a driver and a mechanic. He completed his service and returned to Tuzla in March 1992. When he returned home, the political situation had changed dramatically. Yugoslavia was breaking apart. Bosnia and Herzegovina had declared independence, and war had begun. Because he had served in the JNA, which was now seen as a Serb army, some people in his neighborhood harassed him. They called him a Chetnik, which was a nasty word for a Serb nationalist. This confused and upset him, as he did not consider himself a nationalist. Needing employment and belonging, he was drafted into the Army of the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina in May 1992. This was the army of the new Bosnian government, mostly made of Bosniaks. He served with them for a few months, from July to October. He did not feel at home there either. In late 1992, he switched sides and joined a Croat military force called the Croatian Defense Council, or HVO. He was restless and unhappy. In late 1993, he tried to help a group of Serb civilians escape from Tuzla. He was caught and put in a jail cell by his own commanders for this act. He managed to get a short leave from jail. He used this chance to flee. On November 3, 1993, he crossed over into the territory controlled by Bosnian Serbs called Republika Srpska. He was now a refugee moving between towns. During this time, he married a Serb woman he had met earlier. Soon, they had a newborn son. Dražen felt tremendous pressure to provide for his new family. He had no money and no good prospects. He dreamed of taking his wife and baby far away, to a safe country like Switzerland, but he had no means to do so. Desperate for money to support his family and fund an escape, he made a decision. In 1994, in the town of Bijeljina, he joined the army of Republika Srpska, or VRS. This was the Bosnian Serb army. He was assigned to a special unit called the 10th Sabotage Detachment. He was not a political person. His reason for joining was simple and practical. The army offered a steady paycheck. He needed that money for his wife and child. In early July of 1995, Dražen Erdemovic's unit, the 10th Sabotage Detachment, received orders to move. They were sent to a place called the Branjevo Military Farm. This farm was near the village of Pilica, north of the town of Zvornik. The farm was a large, open field with some barns and sheds. The unit stayed there for several days. They were told they would have a security job to do. During this time, the Bosnian Serb army had captured the UN-safe area of Srebrenica. Starting around July 11th, thousands of Bosniak men and boys were separated from the women and children. Bosniak is the term for Bosnian Muslims. These men and boys were taken prisoner. They were put on buses and trucks and moved to different locations around the region. On the morning of July 16th, buses began arriving at the Branjevo farm. Erdemovic and the other soldiers in his unit were now given their actual orders. They were told that the buses contained Bosniak prisoners from Srebrenica. The soldiers were ordered to execute all of the prisoners. The prisoners were civilian men and boys, ranging in age from about 17 to 60 years old. They were not soldiers. They had surrendered to the Bosnian Serb police or army. Erdemovic later said that he objected to the order. He told his commander he did not want to do it. His commander responded with a threat. The commander told Erdemovic he had two choices. The first choice was to take his weapon and shoot the prisoners. The second choice was to give up his weapon and join the line of prisoners to be killed. Faced with this threat to his own life, Erdemovic took his weapon. The process was organized and systematic. The prisoners were brought off the buses in groups. Their hands were often tied behind their backs. They were told to walk to a specific area of the field. They were forced to lie face down on the ground in a line. A group of soldiers, including Erdemovic, would then shoot them with automatic rifles. After one group was killed, the bodies were pushed into a prepared pit. Then, the next group of 10 prisoners was brought forward. This process continued all day. The soldiers took breaks. More buses arrived. The shooting went on for hours. Erdemovic participated in this activity. He later estimated that he personally shot and killed about 70 people that day. By the end of the day, approximately 1,200 men and boys had been killed at the farm. After the shooting was finished, a bulldozer was used to cover the bodies with soil, creating a mass grave. When the task was done, the unit left the farm. Erdemovic returned to his home where his wife and son were living. He was deeply disturbed by what he had done. He could not sleep well. He had nightmares. He felt constant guilt and anxiety. He began to drink more alcohol to try to forget. Other soldiers from his unit knew he was upset. They worried he would talk about what happened. One soldier, a man named Stanko Savanovic, put particular pressure on Erdemovic to stay silent. Sometime after the massacre, Savanovic met Erdemovic at a bar. They argued. During the argument, Savanovic took out a gun and shot Erdemovic in the torso. The wound was serious. Erdemovic was taken to a hospital. He survived, but the shooting showed him that people involved wanted the secret of the farm to remain hidden. After he recovered from his gunshot wound, Dražen Erdemovic could not escape his guilt. He decided he had to tell someone what happened at the Branjevo farm. In early 1996, he contacted a journalist from the American television network ABC. He met with the reporter and gave a full on-camera interview. He described the massacre in detail, including his own role in it. He said he was confessing because he wanted the world to know the truth, and because he could not live with the secret any longer. The interview was broadcast, drawing international attention to the events at Srebrenica. The broadcast interview led to immediate action. Authorities in the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, where Erdemovic was living, arrested him within days. He was charged with war crimes under Yugoslav law. He did not deny the charges. He repeated his full confession to the Yugoslav police and judges. Because the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, ICTY, had been established by the United Nations to prosecute such crimes, the Yugoslav authorities transferred him to The Hague to stand trial there. At the ICTY, Erdemovic pleaded guilty. This was the first guilty plea the court had received. His trial focused on two main issues. The first issue was establishing the facts of the crime. Prosecutors used his testimony, along with physical evidence from the mass graves at the Branjevo farm, to confirm the massacre. The second issue was his defense. Erdemovic did not claim he was innocent. He argued he acted under duress, meaning he was forced to participate because his commander threatened to kill him if he refused. The judges considered this argument. They decided that the threat of death was a real factor in his actions. They ruled that duress was not a full defense that would make him innocent of the crime. However, they accepted it as a strong mitigating circumstance, meaning it was a fact that could reduce his punishment. The court found him guilty of murder as a crime against humanity. On November 29, 1996, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Erdemovic appealed the sentence. In 1998, the appeals judges of the ICTY reviewed the case. They agreed that the duress he was under was extreme. They reduced his prison sentence from 10 years to 5 years. The court also gave him credit for the time he had already spent in jail since his arrest in March 1996. He was sent to serve his sentence in a prison in Norway. Because of his cooperation and his guilty plea, he was granted early release on August 13, 1999. After his release, Erdemovic entered the ICTY's witness protection program. His identity and location were hidden for his safety. He became a key witness for the prosecution in other major trials at the tribunal. Most notably, he testified in the trial of the former Serbian president, Slobodan Milosevic. In his testimony, he again described the massacre at the farm. He expressed his remorse to all the victims of the war. He stated that he confessed to clear his conscience and to help establish the truth, even though he knew it would cause difficulties for his family. The victims of the Branjevo farm massacre were among the over 8,000 Bosniak men and boys killed in the Srebrenica genocide. Their bodies were later exhumed from the mass graves, identified through DNA analysis, and reburied in a memorial cemetery. The legal process for Erdemovic was separate from the broader search for justice for Srebrenica, which involved prosecuting the military and political leaders who planned the genocide. In the years following his release, Erdemovic lived a hidden life under a new identity. Reports indicated he sought Croatian citizenship in 2006, but the outcome was not publicly confirmed. He remained a figure who demonstrated the complex role of following orders under threat, and his case established important legal principles regarding duress in international law. The story of Dražen Erdemovic concluded with him living a private life, forever linked to the historical record of a crime he helped expose. Story 8. Milan Lukic was born on September 6, 1967, in the town of Foča. This town was in Bosnia, which was then a republic within a larger country called Yugoslavia. His parents were named Mile and Kata Lukic. He grew up with his two brothers, Gajko and Navika, and one sister, Drginja. The family lived in a small village named Rugist, near the town of Visegrad. From 1974, he went to primary school. He first attended school in the village of Klasnik for 4 years. After that, he went to school in Prilovo for another 4 years. In 1982, he began to study at the Ivo Andrić School in Visegrad. He first studied hospitality. Later, he changed to study metallurgy. The records of his exact studies and his work immediately after school are not completely clear. It is known that as a young man, Lukic left Bosnia to find work in other European countries. He lived for a time in the city of Offenbach and Main in Germany. He also lived in Zurich, Switzerland. During this time, he worked as a bartender. In the early 1990s, the country of Yugoslavia began to break apart. There was growing political tension and ethnic conflict. During this time, Lukic returned from abroad to Visegrad. He moved back to live with his parents and one of his brothers in a house on Pionerska Street in Visegrad. He may have also lived for a short time in a nearby village named Siganji in 1992. When the Bosnian War began in 1992, Lukic was living in Visegrad. Serb forces took control of the town from the former Yugoslav army. In this atmosphere of conflict, Lukic became involved with a group of local Serb men. He helped to organize and lead a paramilitary unit. This unit was sometimes called the White Eagles or the Avengers. After Serb forces took control of Visegrad, a campaign began to remove the Bosniak Muslim population from the town and surrounding area. This is known as ethnic cleansing. Milan Lukic and the paramilitary unit under his command played a central role in this campaign. They committed violent acts against Bosniak civilians. One of the crimes involved killing civilians near the Drina River. Lukic took a group of 7 Bosniak men to the riverbank. He forced them to stand in a line. He then shot at them with a firearm. 5 of these men died from the gunshots. In a separate but similar event, Lukic took another 7 Bosniak men from a local sawmill to the riverbank. He shot them repeatedly. All 7 of these men were killed. The most severe crimes involved locking people inside buildings and setting fires. In one instance, Lukic and members of his unit forced approximately 70 Bosniak civilians into a house on Pionerska Street in Visegrad. The victims were women, children, and elderly men. They were barricaded inside a single room. The perpetrators then set the house on fire. When people inside tried to escape by climbing out of the windows, Lukic and others shot at them with automatic weapons. This killed some and injured others. Nearly all the people inside the house died. In another very similar crime, Lukic forced about 70 Bosniak civilians into a house in the village of Bajkovac, near Visegrad. Again, the victims were women, children, and elderly men. All the doors and exits were blocked, so they could not get out. Several explosive devices were then thrown into the house. The explosion and fire killed the people inside. Lukic also personally killed a Bosniak woman in the Potok neighborhood of Visegrad. He was also involved in the operation of detention centers. At a camp set up in the Uzamica military barracks, Bosniak men were held captive. Lukic beat these detained men on multiple occasions. His unit was also responsible for crimes outside Visegrad. On October 22, 1992, members of his unit stopped a bus in the village of Majas. They forcibly removed 16 Bosniak passengers who were citizens of Serbia. These 16 people were taken to a hotel in Visegrad called Velina Vlas. There, they were beaten and tortured. Later, they were taken to the Drina River and executed. On February 27, 1993, members of his unit stopped a train at the Stripsai station. They abducted 19 non-Serb passengers, mostly Bosniaks. These people were taken to a garage near Visegrad. They were robbed, physically abused, tortured, and then killed. Their bodies were hidden and have not been found. During this period, Lukic was briefly detained by Serbian police on 2 occasions for other matters, such as having illegal weapons. However, he was released both times and continued his activities. After the war ended in 1995, Milan Lukic was not immediately arrested. For several years, he lived openly in Serbia and in the Bosnian Serb entity, Republika Srpska. He was involved in various criminal activities. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, ICTY, was established by the United Nations to prosecute war crimes. In 1998, the ICTY prosecutors issued an indictment against Lukic, charging him with multiple counts of crimes against humanity and war crimes. The authorities in Serbia and Republika Srpska did not hand him over to the ICTY. He was arrested several times by Serbian police in the 1990s on separate charges, like having illegal weapons. Each time, he was released from custody. In 2003, a Serbian court found him guilty for the Sjeverin massacre in a trial that was held without him being present, sentencing him to 20 years in prison. Lukic eventually fled from the Balkans. He was arrested in August 2005 in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Argentine police captured him after a tip-off. He was using a fake passport under a different name. He did not fight the extradition process. He was transferred to the detention unit of the ICTY in The Hague in February 2006. His trial at the ICTY began later. He was tried together with his cousin, Sredoj Lukic. The judges heard evidence from many witnesses and examined documents for over a year. The prosecution presented evidence of the murders at the Dina River, the 2 fires on Pionirska Street and in Bajkovac, the killing of the woman in Potok, the beatings at the Uzamica camp, and his role in the Sjeverin and Strpsai massacres. On July 20, 2009, the trial chamber of the ICTY delivered its judgment. The judges found Milan Lukic guilty on all counts. They stated that his crimes, particularly the burning of people locked inside houses, were among the worst acts of inhumanity. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment. His cousin Sredoj was found guilty of aiding the crime on Pionirska Street and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Lukic appealed the judgment. In December 2012, the ICTY appeals chamber confirmed the life sentence. All of his arguments to overturn the conviction were rejected by the judges. In 2014, he was transferred from the UN detention unit in the Netherlands to a regular prison in Estonia to serve his sentence. In 2020, he requested a review of his life sentence. The International Tribunal's judges reviewed this request and rejected it. His life sentence remained in force. The victims of his crimes were primarily Bosniak Muslim civilians from the Visegrad area. Many survivors and family members of the killed testified during the trial. The court's judgment officially established the facts of the massacres, providing a legal record of the events. Some victims' groups expressed disappointment that Lukic was not specifically charged with or convicted for crimes of rape that were committed by his unit. Milan Lukic remains in prison in Estonia, serving a life sentence for his crimes. Story 9. Željko Raznatovic was born on April 17, 1952, in the small town of Brežice, in Slovenia, which was then part of Yugoslavia. His father, Veljko, was a high-ranking officer in the Yugoslav Air Force. Veljko was a strict and often violent man who frequently physically punished his young son. Because of his father's military job, the family moved several times. They lived in Zagreb and Pančevo before finally settling in the capital city of Belgrade. Željko grew up with 3 older sisters in a household where his father's word was law. There was little time for a close bond between the parents and the children. His parents later divorced when he was a teenager. As a boy, Željko was described by his teachers as a problem child. He was unruly and did not follow rules at school. He initially wanted to be a pilot like his father, but he did not apply himself to his studies. His behavior soon led him into trouble with the law. In 1966, when he was just 14 years old, he was arrested for snatching women's purses in a Belgrade park. He was sent to a juvenile detention center for 1 year. After his release, his father sent him to the coastal town of Kotar, hoping he would join the Yugoslav Navy. Instead, the young Raznatovic ran away. He ended up in Paris, France, by the age of 15. In 1969, French police arrested him and sent him back to Yugoslavia. A court there sentenced him to 3 years in a detention center in Valjevo for several burglaries he had committed. It was during this prison sentence that he began to organize his own gang of inmates. This was his first experience in building a group that followed his lead. After his release, he continued a life of crime. In 1972, at age 20, he left for Western Europe. There, he met other criminals from Yugoslavia. He began using a fake passport with the name Arkan, which later became his permanent nickname. He committed bank robberies and other armed thefts in several countries including Belgium, Sweden, the Netherlands, and West Germany. He was arrested multiple times in different countries for these robberies. He also gained a reputation for escaping from prison. He escaped from jails in Belgium in 1979, the Netherlands in 1981, and West Germany in 1981. Each time he escaped, he committed more robberies before being caught again. His final arrest in Western Europe was in Switzerland in 1983, from which he also managed to escape. It was widely believed that during his time in Western Europe, he was secretly working for the Yugoslav State Security Service, the UDBA. This meant that even when he was caught, he had some protection from powerful people in his home country who could help him. He returned to Belgrade, Yugoslavia, in May of 1983. He continued his criminal activities there. 6 months after his return, a bank in Zagreb was robbed. The robbers left a rose on the counter, which was rumored to be Arkan's signature. When 2 plainclothes policemen came to his mother's Belgrade apartment to question him about the robbery, Arkan arrived and shot both officers, wounding them. He was arrested immediately after this shooting. However, he was released from jail only 48 hours later. This event showed everyone in the Belgrade criminal world that Jelko Raznatovic, now known as Arkan, had very powerful friends protecting him from the highest levels of the government. Throughout the mid-1980s, he lived a flashy public life. He ran a popular disco in Belgrade with friends. He drove an expensive pink Cadillac car and spent a lot of time and money in casinos across Yugoslavia. He was once given a 6-month prison sentence for beating a man with a gun after a poker game, but this short sentence did not change his lifestyle. By the late 1980s, football hooliganism was a big problem in Yugoslavia. The supporters of the Red Star Belgrade Football Club, called the Delage, were particularly rowdy. The government asked Arkan to take control of this fan group. He agreed and became the leader of the Delage. He was able to arrange travel for the fans to away games in Western Europe, which made him very popular with them. In May 1990, the political situation in Yugoslavia became very tense. Different republics wanted independence. Arkan, as the leader of the Red Star Belgrade football fans, was present at an away match in Zagreb, Croatia, on May 13th. A huge riot broke out between his Serb fans and the local Croatian fans. This event was a spark in the growing ethnic tensions. Seeing the conflict growing, Arkan used his position and followers to form a paramilitary group. On October 11, 1990, he created the Serb Volunteer Guard, known as the Tigers. The core of this group was made from his loyal football hooligans and his personal friends from the criminal world. They set up their base in a former military facility in the town of Erdut, in eastern Croatia. When the Croatian War of Independence began in 1991, Arkan's Tigers were sent into action. Their goal was to fight for Serb-controlled areas in Croatia. They operated in the Vukovar region. They did not only fight soldiers. They also targeted Croat and Hungarian civilians in towns like Dalj, Erdut, and Tenja. They killed people and forced them from their homes in a process known as ethnic cleansing. In April 1992, the war spread to Bosnia and Herzegovina. Arkan's unit moved to this new front. They were involved in some of the earliest and most brutal attacks. In the town of Bijeljina in April 1992, they rounded up Bosniak, Bosnian Muslim, civilians. They executed many men in the streets and in their homes. They looted shops and houses. This operation was a clear example of ethnic cleansing, meant to remove all non-Serbs from the area. The Tigers used fear and brutality as their main tools. They would arrive in a town, often wearing masks or uniforms with tiger stripes. They would separate men from women and children. The men would be taken away, often to warehouses, schools, or other buildings. Many were never seen again. The unit was well supplied with weapons, often provided by the Serbian state police or taken from captured enemies. One specific method of terror involved a boiler room in a building in Sanski Most, a town in Bosnia. In the autumn of 1995, Arkan's men forcibly detained about 30 non-Serb civilians. They locked them in a small, hot boiler room that was only about 5 square meters in size. They gave them no food or water. The room was not ventilated. 2 of the detained men died from these conditions. The unit also carried out mass executions. In another incident near Sanski Most, they transported approximately 67 Bosniak men from several villages to an isolated location near the village of Sasina. They forced the men to line up and then shot them with automatic weapons. 65 men were killed. Only 2 survived by pretending to be dead. Arkan personally led many of these operations. He was often seen directing his men. He rewarded fighters who were especially brutal with ranks, medals, and loot taken from civilians' homes. This loot included money, jewelry, and electronics. The paramilitary group also became involved in criminal business, like smuggling petrol into Serbia despite international sanctions. The victims were primarily civilian Bosniaks and Croats. They were targeted because of their ethnicity and religion. Women were also victims of violence. The indictment later stated that on a bus outside the Hotel Sanis in Sanski Most, a woman was raped by members of the unit. The purpose of these crimes was to terrify the population so they would flee and never return. For several years, these actions continued. The Serbian Volunteer Guard fought in eastern Croatia and in many areas of Bosnia, including Zvornik, Brčko, and Prijedor. Local police in these areas were often powerless or were themselves involved. International journalists and United Nations peacekeepers began to document evidence of the mass killings and deportations, but the war was still ongoing and Arkan's group operated with impunity. After the wars in Croatia and Bosnia ended in 1995, the international community began to investigate the atrocities that had occurred. The United Nations had already established the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, ICTY, in 1993. Prosecutors and investigators for the ICTY began gathering evidence from mass graves, interviewing survivors, and collecting documents. For years, Željko Raznatovic, Arkan, lived openly in Belgrade, running a football club and other businesses. However, the ICTY was building a case against him. On September 30th, 1997, the tribunal issued a sealed indictment against him for war crimes. This meant he was secretly charged, but the warrant was not made public yet. The prosecutors wanted to build a stronger case and perhaps arrest him by surprise. The indictment listed 24 specific counts. These included crimes against humanity and violations of the laws of war. The charges were based on his command of the Serb Volunteer Guard during events in Sanski Most and other areas in 1995. The crimes listed were the murder of civilians, the cruel treatment of prisoners in the boiler room, the mass executions at Cesina and Trinova, and the rape of a woman. The indictment was finally made public by the ICTY chief prosecutor on March 31, 1999. This was during the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia, which was happening because of the conflict in Kosovo. Now a publicly wanted war crimes suspect, Arkan gave interviews to foreign reporters denying the charges. He claimed he was a patriot and his troops only fought enemy soldiers. Despite the public indictment, the Serbian government under Slobodan Milosevic did not arrest him. He remained free in Belgrade. His political protection, however, was weakening. In the late 1990s, a violent gang war erupted in the city. Many criminals were killed, including some of Arkan's associates. This was a sign that his powerful friends might be withdrawing their support. On January 15, 2000, at 5:05 p.m., Arkan was shot and killed in the lobby of the Intercontinental Hotel in Belgrade. He was sitting at a table with two associates. A young man named Dobrosav Gavric walked up behind him and fired multiple shots from a pistol. Arkan was hit in the head and died shortly after. One of his bodyguards shot and wounded Gavric, but the killer survived. Arkan's two associates at the table were also killed in the attack. The police investigation determined that Gavric was a junior member of a special police unit who had ties to organized crime. A year-long trial was held in Serbia in 2002. Gavric and several accomplices were found guilty of the murder. Gavric was sentenced to 19 years in prison. However, the Supreme Court of Serbia overturned this verdict due to problems with the evidence presented in the first trial. A new trial was held. In October 2006, Dobrosav Gavric and two accomplices were found guilty again. This time, Gavric was sentenced to 30 years in prison for murder. Before he could be taken to prison to serve this sentence, he managed to flee Serbia using a fake Bosnian passport under a different name. Gavric was eventually found in South Africa in 2011. He was involved in a criminal incident there where another man was shot dead. South African police arrested him, discovered his real identity, and began extradition proceedings to send him back to Serbia to serve his 30-year sentence. As of recent years, he has been fighting this extradition in South African courts. With Arkan's death, the ICTY case against him was closed. The tribunal could no longer prosecute a deceased person. The chief prosecutor stated that others who shared responsibility for his crimes would still be pursued. Some members of his Serb volunteer guard were later investigated and prosecuted in local courts for specific murders. Arkan's widow, Svetlana, and his children from various relationships became involved in long legal battles over his property and wealth. His paramilitary group was disbanded. While he was never tried in a court of law, the detailed public indictment by the ICTY, based on extensive evidence, formally documented his command responsibility for systematic war crimes. The final result was that the man believed to be responsible for the deaths and suffering of hundreds of civilians was never legally convicted, but was ultimately killed in the same cycle of violence that he helped create.